So with luck, people will be joining us. There's quite a lot already.
Can they hear us now?
People should be able to hear us now, Joel, with luck.
Okay, good, good.
Yeah.
Feels weird. Feels kind of weird. All right, we'll just wait. We'll wait till we get a pretty good, robust number in, and then we'll jump right in.
Whatever
people
you
are
say,
settling in.
Yeah, whatever you say, I'll do, Joel.
Okay, James will give us the go.
Okay.
Okay, we've got 500 people online now, Stephen. So I think you can start.
Right. Wow. Hey, good evening, good day, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to our webinar on motivational interviewing and beyond. And this episode of listening in a time of uncertainty. I'm Joel Porter. I'm living in Gold Coast, Australia. I'm just a little bit about me. I'm a parent, a clinical psychologist, longtime motivational interviewing practitioner and trainer, and very excited about hanging out with my good friend Steve and having a conversation and sharing some ideas about listening, particularly in this time when the world is in such an uncertain place. Steve, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm trying to absorb this all. It's the first time I've ever done this, you know, like you 12, 13,000 miles away and you know, hi, Joel, and hello to everybody who's tuned in. It's our first venture together. My name's Stephen Rolnick, and I'm talking to you from Cardiff, Wales in the United Kingdom. I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa, which I return to regularly. And over the last few decades, I guess my journey has been one of being trained as a clinical psychologist. And then I could almost repeat what Joel said, which is I became a motivational interviewing practitioner, therapist, trainer in motivational interviewing. But Joel and I share a wider interest in the relevance of all this stuff, and hence the title of the webinar we have today.
So what Steve and I have in store, and this whole idea of doing this just sort of fell out of a conversation we had one evening when we were just chatting about the world and how it is, and we were trying to figure out how we could do some good and share some of what we know. We certainly don't feel like we have the final say in this topic around listening or motivational interviewing or anything beyond that. Well, I guess we're just a couple of blokes with some ideas who enjoy having a good conversation. So what we have in store tonight is we're going to cover 3 topics, and some of them are pretty big, and one of them is what is listening. Another one is the mindset of listening, and the final one is some of the skills of listening. And the way we're going to do this is both of us are going to talk, share some stories, converse with each other, and then after each conversation, we're going to open it up for Q&A. And you know, and right now, what I want to do is I want to introduce our colleague James Lawrence, who happens to just be about 10 kilometers up the road from me here in Gold Coast, and he's here to make sure everything goes okay, and he's going to do a little bit of housekeeping.
Hi guys, yeah, James here on the Gold Coast too, and it's a real pleasure to be joining you as well tonight, and to be joining a lot of like-minded people to discuss motivation interviewing and in particular listening in a time of uncertainty. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to be involved.
Brilliant, James. We're glad you're here. So we've gone a little bit over the structure already. So James, if you could just pop up the surprise slide. And what I'd like for Steve to do is tell us what this slide's all about.
Sure thing. Sure thing. We're only going to use 2 slides in the whole presentation. and this is one of them. And this is somebody called Lucinda Evans, and she's running a feeding program for children every day. And this is getting more and more urgent as the weeks unfold. The location is a place called Lavender Hill in Cape Town in South Africa. And there are two reasons why I thought we'd share this slide with you. One of them is because it shows us what listening can look like, that it occurs in a context, and that one does not need to be a counselor to do this well, which I guess is one of the main points of the webinar. And so between the world of action on the one hand, which is essential at this time, setting boundaries, doing the right thing, looking after each other and other people, on the one hand, and the suffering and experience of people on the other, lies this channel and the potential for listening. So that's the first reason we've got this slide on the board. The second is because at the end of the webinar, we're going to put out a call for help and donations to a not-for-profit project which sits precisely in that suburb of Lavender Hill. So more on that later. And I suggest now we ask James to take us through any housekeeping matters, and I'll hand you over to him or to Joel to take us the next step.
Absolutely. So just three very quick points from me. We are recording the webinar this evening, and we will be emailing you out the recording in the next day or so. And just one quick note, when you do click through to access that video, you can also choose to subscribe to Stephen's monthly email newsletter to keep you informed of future webinars in this series. Point two, we will be doing a Q&A at the end of each section of the webinar, and you can submit your questions via the Q&A control in your Zoom. Please just be mindful though that we do have many hundreds of people online tonight, so we probably won't be able to get to all of your questions, but we'll do our very best. And finally, we just recommend that you turn off Outlook, Skype, or any other online backups or downloads you may have running, just to ensure you get the fastest internet possible and hopefully the best quality webinar that we can give you this evening. So that's it for me. Thanks again for joining us tonight. It's great to be involved, and I'll now pass you back over to Joel and to Stephen.
All right, thanks, James. All right, well, let's jump right in, and maybe start with the biggest question of the night, and one question where I imagine there's not a lot of consensus amongst people who think about listening. But our first question is what is listening? What does it involve?
Yeah, Joel, and we thought we'd start with me here, and I agree. It's an interesting question, what is listening? And I thought I would start with a rather simple story. And I guess we all have these stories, you know, where you have a striking experience that changes things for you. And that's what happened to me with this. I was driving up through the wet, windy, dark hills of mid Wales, just with my 7-year-old son in the back seat. And it was getting seriously wet. And so I decided to put the windscreen wipers on fast and sort of made this announcement to him. I'm going to put them on fast. And Joel, from the back of the car, there was a bit of silence. And then he said, "That must make driving quite difficult for you, Dad." And I thought, hang on, I felt this sense of feeling very connected to this guy because he had empathized with me. He didn't ask a question. He was curious. He felt safe there in the back of the car. And he just threw this guess out there. And honestly, it changed the way I look at not what listening is, but what the potential for this skill is, which I can return to in a moment. But, you know, I'm wondering what you notice in that story.
Well, lots of things. And right off, it sounds like it's one of those kind of moments where you had an experience that just pulls some things together in an instant. You know, I'm struck by, and this was your young son, wasn't it? How old was he?
He was about 7.
About 7.
Yeah.
And I'm just struck by all the things that he or most people might have said, like, be careful, you know, it could be really dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, and could have warned you or
when we're going to get there, Dad?
yeah, or just ignored it.
Yeah. And
Well, and you know, in motivational interviewing lingo, that's quite the complex reflection he gave you.
yeah, and we'll get back to that. Well, I'll return to that comment, but you know, what struck me was that I suppose it was a radical shift in the sense that I suppose I had this hat on my head, which is like, if you like, I know about listening and I'm a psychologist and I teach people about listening. And I just had to take that hat off because basically a kid can do it. And I've been wondering about the ramifications of this ever since. And if you don't mind, I'd like to highlight some, but I thought I'd take this opportunity to kind of say what my understanding of listening is. And then I'll mention what I think the ramifications are, if that's okay. Am I making sense, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, carry on.
Like, just to be a bit analytical about it for a moment. Step 1 is feeling empathy for someone else, to stand in someone else's shoes. And those of you that don't know about it, plug Empathy Museum into Google, for example. There's a wonderful group of people in London who've developed something called an Empathy Museum. And if you read around that and listen to what they're saying, it's quite clear they adhere to the dictionary definition of empathy, which is this ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But if that is step 1, an internal experience, and you're in conversation with someone else, how do they know that you're feeling that empathy? Now, from my training in psychology, and I can't help putting that hat on, there is a step 2, which is very direct. I mean, they might notice it because you're looking intently at them, or you're giving off the impression of being interested in their experience. But the step 2, which we, you know, can acknowledge the fantastic contribution of Carl Rogers from client-centered counseling, is step 2 is you take that internal experience and you emit a verbal behavior, if you like. You make the link with them in that you say something so that they realize you're standing in their shoes. So that must make driving difficult for you, Dad, was something that he said that demonstrated pretty clearly that he understood my experience. And it's that second step, that verbal behavior, that I guess you and I call listening. And there are a number of other phrases for this, or terms for this, which maybe are worth clarifying. There's reflective listening is another word for it, empathic listening. And I think active listening, paraphrasing is sometimes used. But the point is that in making the verbal statement, it creates an empathic connection.
Absolutely.
Between the two of us. So
and it gives a person the real clear message that I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, and what your dilemma is, or what you're thinking or feeling about this, but you're not just repeating it right back to them.
Yeah.
Because that would get weird for a 7-year-old really quick too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, I guess, you know, I want to try and express why I found this so profound, this experience, right?
Please do.
Was when I took my expert hat off and thought about it, the first point's obvious, which is that empathic listening isn't some specialist thing that only psychologists really know about, and, you know, almost in a patronizing way, can pass this on to other people who don't know about it. This is something that we have inside all of us. including children.
Mm.
And I feel disappointed that so few psychologists have made this point and have really tried to pass on the knowledge about this to the lay public, with the exception of Carl Rogers, who was a wonderful guy. And towards the end of his life, he was suggesting what exactly the conclusion that I reached as a result of that drive up through mid-Wales, which is that it's really important to help kids improve their empathic listening skills as no doubt as the ego develops more. And there's 101 ways of doing this. And they do it naturally anyway. Whenever they play role play games, they're actually in other people's worlds. So they're super skilled at this. But sadly, I think this is hammered out of us in school and to some extent at home. So kind of my feeling is that this should be at the center of the educational curriculum. And with careful and thoughtful and creative handling, this can become like a skill like kicking a ball. You know, some people get really skilled at kicking a ball, but we can all kick a ball. So why not help everybody get better at this skill? So that's my sort of current feeling about it.
Well, one of the things that I've experienced, and I have a little story to kind of highlight it as well too, is that I've had the pleasure and the real privilege to do motivational interviewing training, just like you, Steve, a lot of different places around the world, and like a lot of our colleagues get the opportunity to do. And in doing that, one of the things that I've found is that, and you know, this, you don't have to be a psychologist to figure this one out, is that empathy and compassion are sort of universal.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll tell you the short version of the story is that a few years ago, I was doing some work with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Myanmar.
Yeah.
And I got the opportunity to go there 3 different times. And the second time I was there, and I was living in New Zealand at the time, and it was a long trip, and I was really jet lagged. And I got in at night, and the thing started the first thing in the morning, and I went down the lobby, and these lovely psychiatrists came up to me, and they said, "Oh, Dr. Porter, would you be okay to do a role play at the workshop?" And I'm like, "Sure, no problem. I like doing role plays." And I said, "When do you want to do it?" And they said, "Well, the guy's on the way up. We have a patient coming from the local alcohol treatment ward, and he's on the way right now."
Wow.
And I thought, wow, what a way to start a workshop in translation. So anyway, they bring in this gentleman, and he sits down across from me, and he was either really nervous or detoxing still. And this other fella sits between us to the side as a translator. And they just kind of said, "Okay, go do motivational interviewing." And so I just started the conversation, you know, with the basics of motivational interviewing, asking some open-ended questions and offering reflections. And the more I would ask about his world, the more he would talk, which would give me more information that I could form reflections on. And we carried on for quite a while. And I was thinking, I'm not sure if this is even making sense. Does this culturally translate from a Western culture to a Burmese culture? And at the end of it, we finished up, and I asked the translator to ask him one more question. And I said, could you ask him if there was anything about this conversation that was helpful? And he said, yes. And I said, could you please tell me what that is? He said, it was the way that you were basically repeating what I was saying back to me in a different way that I said it.
Okay. Yeah. And across the barriers of language and culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could tell the more attuned empathically I got with this man, the more he wanted to tell me more about his world, even though he was a rice farmer from Burma, and I'm this strange psychologist fellow that's come up from New Zealand, and he's in this weird setting that I'm sure he was voluntold to come do.
It's got this feeling.
But it was a bridging moment for me with motivational interviewing. Yeah. It was like, yeah, this does translate.
Or with listening.
Yeah, just listening.
and it's got this feeling of getting out of someone's way.
Absolutely.
Getting out
I
of.
wasn't there to do anything to him, only to try to understand him and try to understand his dilemma and how alcohol may or may not fit in with all that. We didn't really get that far into it.
Yeah. You know, it reminds me of quite a famous quote from the football or soccer world from somebody called Johan Cruyff, who said something like this, that football is a very simple game. Playing skillful football is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something we can, when we get to the skills of listening, that'll reemerge for sure.
Yeah.
Because listening is something that we all do all the time.
Yeah.
But what we listen to and how we respond to it can make all the difference.
And that's the thing that you can practice, and we will move on to that. But it's also striking what you didn't do. And I'm thinking both of you and the little boy in the back of the car. Okay, you both said things that amounted to getting out of somebody's way and just showing them that you understand their experience. You might have asked the odd question, and questions can certainly help with listening, but you didn't have an artificial conversation in which you're just asking one question after another.
Right.
Yeah. It sounds like you didn't cut across the person or interpret or warn or counter anything he was saying. Hence my reference to sort of like getting out of the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. It's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of it. That's part of the mindset of it, to be able to have a mindset that you can get out of the way. And the good news is that's our second topic.
Yeah, we're gonna move on to that. But I thought I also noticed, and this doesn't apply to the kid in the back of the car, but certainly to a visiting expert going into Burma, situation like that, it's very tempting to try and solve someone's problem. You know, I wouldn't have blamed you for feeling a little bit anxious in a situation like that, and wanting to kind of sort of step in and go, okay, now let me tell you. And you know, we call this the righting reflex in the healthcare and criminal justice world, where you, with a good heart, you see a problem and you try and fix it for someone. Whether that's education, healthcare, sport, or whatever. And it's not always a dysfunctional thing, but if you want to listen, that's something you don't want to use, is the righting reflex. It's the biggest roadblock. Yeah. It's the biggest roadblock to listening.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Well, and even the righting reflex comes from a place of wanting to be helpful. But sometimes we can be too helpful at the wrong time. Yeah.
And in my imagination, thinking of that story you've just told, you did say I asked a few questions. And if you like, if asking questions is like knocking on a door, listening is what happens when you go inside.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a story of Steve Berg-Smith, our good friend from the United States, a trainer there, who was once in northern Alaska running a workshop, and an elder from this Indian tribe, well into her 80s, sat at the back of the room for something like 3 days. It was a 3-day workshop, and she never said a word. And just as the workshop ended, she came forward and she said, "This is like going into someone's house. Please pay respects to them and restrain yourself from rearranging their furniture." And it sounded like that Burmese person with a drinking problem, he appreciated you not rearranging his furniture.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting, and I won't dive into this too much, but what that Inuit woman elder had said basically summarized what Carl Rogers said in 2 paragraphs in his seminal book, Client-Centered Therapy, about what empathy is, about coming into somebody's world and not disturbing it too much, but really trying to understand what's going on, and also not getting lost in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering now, I'm looking at the clock and I'm wondering now whether we can have a break for Q&A, James.
Yeah.
Good idea. I was just about to interrupt, but I didn't want. You're in full flow, so I didn't want to break your train of thought. So, as you rightly say, we'll take a quick break for some questions. And we've had some wonderful questions coming in. So the first one I'd like to offer you comes from Russell Earnshaw, who wonders, are there any downsides to listening and empathy?
Wow. That's a big one. That's a real big one. Joel, I've got some reflections to offer here. And thank you.
Yeah. I'll take a crack at it after you.
Wow, it's a big one, this. Are there downsides to listening and empathy? And thank you, Russell, for that question. Perhaps I can say yes, very personally, because I had an experience of severe burnout. And there is a phrase called empathy fatigue. And self-awareness and reflection about what I was going through was sorely lacking for me. I had a diary full of appointments, a family back home, and I burnt out. And I would say I was suffering from empathy fatigue. So that is a downside, but I'm not convinced it's a kind of a problem with empathy. It felt to me more like a problem with my own self-regulation. And I think we've all come across people working on the front line of healthcare, policing, wherever, who will say that they can only survive by not empathizing too much.
Mm.
And the sort of image of putting a flame-proof suit on has coherence for some people. A pediatric neurosurgeon I met recently said that. He said, I've got to get on with the job here. And so there's a certain natural protectiveness to regulating yourself so that you don't suffer as a consequence of empathizing too much. But could I say something provocative here, Joel?
Please.
Maybe
Never shy away from that, Steve.
About a criticism about empathy, which is, does it always mean when you're empathizing with somebody that you've got to feel their experience deeply? And I'm not so sure about this. I used to see sexually abusing men as clients. Now, I didn't find it difficult. I used to find it possible to empathize with them, but I never found it difficult. In other words, I managed to detach my kind of own feelings about their behavior from my ability nonetheless to empathize with them. Mm-hmm. So I'm also reminded of what our dear friend Terry Moyers, a motivational interviewing trainer, says. I saw her in a workshop here in Cardiff where she stood up in front of the people and said, I'm not a particularly warm and friendly person, but I'm damn good at empathic listening, right? In other words, being empathic doesn't mean being warm and friendly. And technically what we're saying is empathic listening involves saying something to someone that shows that you understand their experience. Yeah. You might not have immersed yourself in it. So, you know, I guess I'm confused about this. And I do have one other point about empathy, but I feel like it's time to hand over to you, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, I think Russell's question was about listening. Was that right, James? Is there a downside to listening?
No,
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
any downside?
But a part of what we're talking about is listening is half of the equation of being empathic. And Steve, I think we could carry on talking about empathy and can you teach people empathy and where does it come from and all of these robust things around empathy all night. And I think these are great things for us to be talking about. And I just want to get back to, is there a downside to listening? The only thing that came to my mind was sometimes just listening isn't enough.
Right.
Sometimes people need to be heard, but they also need some good guidance, information to make choices about, or even direction when they feel really stuck.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But if you just think all I'm going to do is listen, in my experiences of learning client-centered therapy years and years ago, all you did was go round and round in circles.
Yeah.
And there's so many people I've worked with learning motivational interviewing over the years who go, I just keep stuck on the merry-go-round. Okay. And because they're doing very empathic listening, but the client or the person is needing a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't mean they need to be told what to do necessarily, but they need some sort of options.
Yeah.
To work with.
So listening is just one element of helpfulness.
Yes.
And there are others, and we'll go on to describe what motivational interviewing is with luck a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I feel, Joel, I've got to mention that there's somebody called Paul Bloom who wrote a book called Against Empathy. Okay. Now this is quite deep stuff, and I don't think we've got time for this. I don't think James is going to let us. Okay. James is going to tell us he's got one or two more questions or whatever.
I have. There's some fantastic questions.
Yeah, okay. I think we'll save Paul Bloom's work for another conversation, Steve.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good decision. I trust it. James.
Okay. Well, Mr. Paul Shawcross is wondering, or asks, I understand the concept of active listening and empathetic responses. However, I still really struggle to stop myself responding with a solution/problem solving response. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, we'll get on to that in a moment, okay? When we talk about the mindset, I think it's lovely, it's beautiful. But when we talk about the mindset of listening, so I'm not fobbing you off. When we talk about the mindset of listening, we will highlight how you can restrain yourself, okay? Because you're talking probably about the writing reflex kicking in. And we'll talk about
I just want to say it's not an either or. You know, you don't listen or respond. You can do both. In some ways, timing is really important, and knowing what to listen for can help you with the timing, but we'll jump back into that.
Yeah.
Okay, perhaps one more then, from Elizabeth Anastasiadi, and I hope I pronounced your surname right there, Elizabeth, and she's wondering, when declaring empathy, is there a risk of making assumptions? Might be better to wonder whether a situation is difficult for somebody instead of stating it.
Yes, there is a risk. And doing this sort of empathic listening, one of the things that for me that it's clear is what I'm not doing is I'm not doing interpretive listening. I'm not trying to interpret what I think the client is experiencing and wanting them to take that on board or mull it over. I think that's a really important, that's an important thing to do for sure. The other thing, and you know, again, this is real what I've learned practicing motivational interviewing and person-centered therapy over the years, is that when you have a good relationship with somebody and you're doing more than just saying sounds like, what I think you're saying, what I hear you saying, and you're speaking to the person, if you get misattuned with them, they'll correct you. They'll say, no, it's not like that. And then I can say, well, sorry about that. What is it like for you? And they will work actively in the relationship to help me get better tuned in with what they're saying. That's what came to mind. It's a great question.
Yeah, so you're saying that actually the person you're speaking to is your best teacher. Yes.
I remember back in my very first training in motivational interviewing in New Mexico with Bill and Terry in the late 90s. Bill walked on I walked out in front of us and said, I'm not going to teach you how to do motivational interviewing. And I'm like, what? I just flew halfway across the country for this. He said, your clients are going to teach you how to do it. We're going to give you a map and a compass.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm kind of reminded of that difference between an eagle and a mouse. That part of your mind is a bit like an eagle, watching what's going on, learning from experiencing, watching the reaction of the person you're speaking to. And the mouse in you is responding moment to moment. And it seems like
that's a nice analogy.
Is sometimes a helpful distinction.
Yeah. Except I'm not trying to win.
No. Get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
James?
No, but
Yeah, perhaps we can squeeze in one more.
okay.
This is from David. Is empathy something we can really improve, or is it a biological gift? So I guess that's a nature versus nurture debate in some respects.
Yeah, I just think, what that kid in the back seat taught me, right, was that if things like this are natural to you, curiosity, particularly curiosity, a fairly uncluttered mind, a lack of distraction, then you can empathize. So I've noticed it. If we notice it in very, very young kids, they're imaginative and curious. I'm not sure how to answer the question. We can all get better at it.
I think of it kind of like temperament. I think that maybe some people have some, maybe there is, we're not just one thing. So we're not just our genetics, and we're not just our environment, and we're just not just our phenomenal psychological worlds. But I wonder if, there are, some people who might be more predisposed to being empathic than other people, depending on the environment that they're in.
I hate it, Joel. I absolutely hate it. We've done such an Olympic gold medal level job of squashing this capacity out of children. We're not in a position to pass judgment.
No, Steve, I'm not saying that we need to kind of do that. It just seems, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about that, Steve. But at least in adults, and having two kids myself, I can see the difference of how two kids can be raised by the same two parents in the same house and have different levels of empathy.
Yeah, so there's difference in temperament. I'm just provoking you, Joel. I'm not being...
Please do. Yeah. That's what we wanted.
Okay.
Okay, gents, perhaps we should move on now to section 2.
The mindset. Well, here you go. I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to start off with my little story on this one, and this is a quick story, and it's the training story that I experienced as a trainee when I was doing my pre-doctoral stuff at the University of Washington at the Student Counseling Center, and I had a lovely, absolutely brilliant supervisor named Barbara Jacobson. And we used to have to videotape every one of our sessions. And after she got to know me and we had a really lovely relationship, I remember I was put on this video, and about halfway through it, she reached over and pressed pause, and she looked at me and she said, "Joel, I think it's really important about right now that you take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth."
What were you like before then? I mean, why did she say that?
I think I was trying to be really helpful, and I was trying to help somebody make sense out of something they were struggling with, because it was making me unsettled, And I remember the client, I remember the session, I remember the moment of all the clients I've seen over these years. And I think before that, I thought I knew more than I did.
Yeah.
It's kind of like being a parent. I thought I would be a different parent than I was until I had kids.
Yeah. It reminds me of the experience I had. I was in my very first placement as a clinical psychologist, and the psychiatrist was in child guidance clinic or something. The psychiatrist came up to me and said, "I want to tell you something, young man. You'll never really be able to help people if you're so enthusiastic." And I hated him for it, For years, I hated him for it. And of course, I realized he was right in a way.
Yeah.
Because I was so enthusiastic. I was jumping in with this idea, that idea, that idea. And, you know, experience over the years in work, and forget about with kids as well, kind of definitely teaches us to hold back and to
Yes.
and to take the cotton wool out of their ears. So it's a wonderful story, that. And
Yeah, well, both of them are quite similar. And you know, and as I take that forward into how I think about my own work and supervising other people and training and coaching other people, it's something I heard you say when you came down to Melbourne for one of our motivational interviewing things, and you may not even remember it, but you got up and you started talking about how important it is to declutter your mind, you know, and I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. That when you go in to wanting to listen to somebody, particularly when you don't have all the answers, like these uncertain times, it's really important to kind of get out of the way in a way where I can kind of set all of my hypotheses and my wonderings and my diagnostic stuff, just let it all go and really try to tune in to what this person is saying. And trust that engaging in that process will work, that it works, and it does, and surprisingly.
yeah, and that's the subject of this webinar. We're not saying other things aren't helpful, but in this time of uncertainty, we see in Lucinda Evans, in that photograph, a sort of loving kindness, being down on the same level as this child, where she's no doubt this is a channel for healing and growth in that child, that she's a privileged witness to. And she is demonstrating, I think, the most beautiful humility in coming down to the child's level like that and just being with the child. Because that kid could probably be worried about a fire in a shack next door, why the grown-ups are shouting, no idea why it's so hungry. There's a lot going on. And, you know, in this time of uncertainty, listening as an act of loving kindness is why we decided to put this webinar on.
Yeah.
But, you know, Joel, I'd like to just like be a little bit more specific about what is the mindset involved in listening. And I've got some ideas that really only came to me in the last couple of months. And I'd be interested to know what you think of them.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear about it.
The question is, what sort of mindset do you need to be in if you want to listen to somebody? You know, I've talked about enthusiasm. You've talked about talking too much as being not what you want. But this idea of clutter, I came up with this idea recently of 3 C's that you want to let go of if you want to get into the mindset of listening. One of them is clutter, which for a number of years I've realized for me was pretty major. I want to let go of clutter from my mind. And Lucinda Evans's face on that playing field seems to emit that. I'm just open for you at this point in time. So that's letting go of clutter. But the other 2 C's I've been laughing at, which is, the other for me is cleverness. You want to let go of cleverness. And the third is complexity. So I can say to you, Joel, that when I'm listening well, I'm succeeding in letting go clutter, cleverness, and complexity. The question then is, to get into that state of mind, what do you hold on to? Obviously, it's not, you're not completely blank. And then just this week, I came up with 3 C's there as well, okay? Which is what you want. If you let go of cleverness, complexity, and clutter, what I find useful to hold on to is being curious, calm, and compassionate. Those 3. And James, if you could put that slide of Lucinda Evans up again. I want to ask you a question, Joel. James
Okay.
might not be there. He might or might not be with us right now. Okay. Joel, I'm putting it to you that Lucinda on the ground there is demonstrating curiosity, calm, and compassion. And she's not trying to be clever, complex, or clutter her mind with too much. So that's what I'm wondering. I wonder if that's helpful for capturing the mindset involved in listening. You know, it's not just about being warm and friendly, which is a very common idea in sport and in education, that if I just put my arm around people and I'm nice and friendly, I'm showing them empathy. We're actually saying this goes a little bit further than that.
Yeah. No, I like your 6 C's there, Steve. You know, I was wondering what you were going to come up with as on the other side of it. You know, and one of the things that that I really enjoy about doing motivational interviewing is it's all about, I think one of the key attributes of doing it well is being genuinely curious about what's going on with another human being, trying to understand that. And doing motivational interviewing, or at least having a framework of how you're going to listen to somebody, help you regulate your own emotions or control your own reactions to what's going on, which helps you stay calm.
Yeah,
you know,
and
letting go of cleverness is, boy, I wish you had been my supervisor back then, because I think that's what I was trying to be, is clever. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, to let that go is a real treat. To know that I don't have to solve this problem or have all the answers or come up with the most brilliant thing to say that's going to create an epiphany and everything's going to change rapidly.
Yeah. But do you think there's a risk of us falling into a sort of trap here, which you could call a sort of a kind of nerdy expert psychologist trap? It's all very well, and here's the trap. It's all very well for us psychologists who are used to sitting in a calm environment. We professionally trained to listen to other people, when in fact, actually in everyday life, it's much harder to listen because do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It is. You know, even in my home with the people I love the most, you know, sometimes it's hard to listen because there's just so much going on.
Well, the more you love them, I find, the more concern I've got, the more my mind gets cluttered with this and that. So it's easy for us to go on about being calm and uncluttered and simple, but actually in everyday life, although this is a skill that we've all got, like the way the little kid did in the back of the car, I really feel that like if we'd been educated in a way to nurture the skill and to learn self-regulation in all educational environments, whether it's sports, schools, whatever, it'll be much easier for folk to listen when the heat's up, because that's when it's hard. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think of how many misunderstandings happen because people aren't listening to each other. Because either they have their needs, agendas, or desires ahead of what's going on.
And at home now, I'm also finding that things can get a little bit hectic and heated and fearful. And I have to remind myself actually to make time to just be with the kid.
Sure.
In some kind of play activity so that he can feel contained and safe. And then I can start to listen to him.
I mean, one of the things that I've just found here and in Australia, we're not as tragically affected as you guys are in the UK or in New York or in Spain and Italy. That's not to say that the COVID-19 isn't an issue here. But when I look at the graphs and I look at how fortunate we are with the numbers that get posted every day and how the curve is going, I still find that I have to have a mindset, you know, of being at home, of being going to the shops, because to walking my dog, because I walk next to somebody and they want to, you know, we've passed enough that they want to share that they've had a real crappy day, you know,
Yeah.
or it's getting hard.
Yeah.
That kind of, you know, there has to be a mindset going into day-to-day interactions with people, knowing that we're all struggling with a very similar thing in different ways.
And as people come out of lockdown, the world's not going to be the same. And
No.
It's going to be disturbing. And I would place very high priority on helping people feel heard and understood. I guess that's what's uniting both of us, isn't it?
Yeah. And you just don't have to have all the answers or provide a solution when there actually is no solution.
Yeah.
You know?
Can I shift focus slightly? I'm just looking at the time. We're doing okay.
Okay.
No, I think I'm going to leave that story, actually. Just looking at the clock, I had another story for you. I'm going to leave it because I think that James is probably going to want us to go into Q&A. And that's
Okay.
absolutely fine, James.
It's a good audible.
Yeah. James,
Okay, so perhaps we could revisit that question from Paul then. And if I just remind you of that, so he asked, I understand the concept of active listening and empathetic responses. However, I still really struggle to stop myself responding with a solution/problem solving response. Any tips?
Yeah, Paul, I would say, you know, think about those 6 C's. And I think number one is to notice what's happening inside you, which is exactly what you've done. You notice this inside you, and you notice this reaction inside you. And that's a wonderful platform for stopping yourself, I guess. When you notice yourself doing it, stopping yourself. And I'm hoping that when we go on to the skill of reflective listening or empathic listening, it'll kind of click for you in that you'll see that you can actually swing straight across to listening in a situation like that when you have that kind of realization. But I think, you know, I'm hoping the guideline of those 6 C's will be of help to you. But it does start with you, and you've started in the right place, Paul.
How about I'd like to kind of share something I've picked up from one of our Menti colleagues along the way in terms of, probably Bill, in terms of kind of I guess it's part of a mindset, or maybe even a short definition of motivational interviewing, which is, you know, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have a conversation with someone where they can come up with their own arguments and reasons for change, and I'm not the one who's trying to install them into the person. I'm not trying to persuade them to do what I think they should do or what I think would be best for them. But I'm trying to interact with them in a way where they can hear themselves talk out loud about what their own ideas and options are around trying to make some change. And quite often people are pretty clever, you know, and they can say, you know, maybe I could do this, or I hadn't thought about that, but that sounds like an idea, and I can reflect that back, or I can summarize it back to them. Where I'm not the one saying, I think you should, or here's what other people do that I've worked with. Say, you know, it's kind of keeping your powder dry, you know, and just giving people time to come to their own decisions. But you can facilitate and guide the conversation.
Okay, here's an interesting statement from Chloe Green, who wonders, or who states, I think there is a big difference between hearing and listening. People often think they are listening when really they are only hearing. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
I agree completely.
Listening is not just a question of hearing or having the internal, you might have the internal experience, as we've said.
Yeah.
Chloe, it's completely congruent with what we're saying. It's one thing to hear, it's another thing to check out with the person that what you've heard and are inferring about their experience is their experience. And that's where the beauty of an empathic listening statement comes in.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you, Chloe.
Yeah, I agree. And I can't add anything to that without talking about personal conversations.
Okay, maybe time for one more then.
Okay.
This comes from Alberto Gonzalez from Spain, who wonders, what is motivational interviewing? Can you describe it in simple language?
Well, Steve, since I already chucked my idea out there, why don't you go?
Yeah, you've mentioned it a few times, Joel, and I think the best way to do this is probably to show you what it looks like. And I know that in our final section of this webinar on the skills involved, we've got a transcript to show you. And rather than be too clever now and try and capture what motivational interviewing is in a few words, which I can do, why don't we wait until we get to that transcript and I can say to you, that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. Those are the skills. So if you don't mind, let's just wait a few minutes because we'll be onto that quite soon.
You know what would have been fun if time wasn't an issue, Steve?
Yeah.
Would be you and I to do like a role play and do a demonstration. We can put that in the maybe next time box. Yeah, we can certainly do a webinar on that, because it's obviously the case that you don't get better and improve your skills unless you have the courage to fail. We know that from lots of arenas. So I won't. And just for people to know that, you know, there are some really good demonstrations of motivational interviewing on YouTube. You know, I can't point you to any particular one, but people can listen to them and kind of start figuring it out for themselves.
And I think the point to make here is that motivational interviewing is founded on Rogers's client-centered counseling, and it's a particular form of it that is focused on purposefully on change. Okay, so maybe that's a helpful way of putting it. So, but what we're talking about today is primarily that foundation.
Yeah.
And listening. How listening is then? Sorry.
I was just going to say, listening is the key skill of motivational interviewing.
It's the key skill, and how it's used in motivational interviewing we'll come on to in a moment. But the subject of this webinar is really about listening in a time of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're an hour in now, so perhaps that's a good time to move on now to section 3.
All right. So Steve, let me hear what you think about this, because I know that you're a jazz fan. I know that that's a type of music that you enjoy. And I didn't really kind of get into jazz music until my early 20s, when I started hanging around with some good friends that are still just some of my best friends now. And I didn't understand it that much when I first heard it, because I was a rock and roller. And it sounded like just a cacophony of instruments, kind of doing their own thing, particularly when they'd put on people like Ornette Coleman and some of Miles Davis's stuff. And I didn't understand it, but they actually taught me how to listen to it. They taught me what was happening within the ensemble and how they were playing together and how they would go apart, and why, one guy was playing this way and the other guys were playing that way. And once I could start listening to what was going on, then the bigger picture came together and I got it. And once I got it, then it just goes deeper and deeper. And it's such a lovely way of enjoying music that just keeps rewarding itself the more I listen to it. So I think for me, as somebody whose musical instrument is the hi-fi, and I don't have a background in music theory or anything like that, it really took some instruction for me to actually understand what was going on and learn how to listen to it in a way in which it didn't feel like it was moving in different directions and wasn't pleasant to listen to.
So that you threw yourself into the challenge of learning more about this subject.
Yes. Yeah. And I needed people to guide me a little bit.
Yeah. And you found yourself enjoying the experience.
Oh, absolutely love it. I mean, it's opened doors to all kinds of music from there. And it's kind of your eagle and your mouse, right? Because, and it's like listening. There's all this going on here, but then sometimes you just want to pay attention to what the saxophone player's doing. But you want to hold it all together at the same time because it's not just one person.
I was wondering what the links were for you between that story and that experience and the conversation in which you're listening.
I think part of that was people listening to my therapy work and giving me good feedback and pointing out to me what I wasn't hearing. And asking me why I chose to focus on one thing versus another thing.
Yeah.
Particularly when clients have a way of kind of repeating back what they're saying when you're not getting it because you're thinking about something else.
Yeah. So someone's helping you to notice the patterns.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the rhythm of the conversation too.
Yeah. And a conversation where listening is happening looks and feels very normal. It's not discordant. If we're going to start referring to musical images, it's not a discordant conversation. It's got a musicality to it. And I've noticed this, this might seem a bit weird, but I've noticed that if you take core communication skills like open questions, empathic listening statements, affirmation, summaries, these are 4 core communication skills, and you annotate a conversation using just the abbreviation, OARS or whatever, you find a pattern emerges. And when I'm listening to somebody and not solving problems, because that's what it seems is the appropriate thing to do, it has a musicality. And I can almost see it as first you have you often have an open question, that's like knocking on the door, but then you have a few R's and the occasional A before the next open question. And so you can almost develop something akin to a musical score in a conversation. And I guess when we move on to, which maybe now's a good time, to the transcript that we know is prepared for us to show people, we'll see elements of that musicality. You reckon, yeah? Do you reckon good time to move on?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, James, if you can just hold that back for a moment. Just let me, you can pull it back, James. Yeah, sorry, guys. I just thought I'd give you a bit of context. And the question is, what does listening look and feel like? And what does motivational interviewing look and feel like? And I thought instead of trying to be clever and explain all this verbally, why don't we dive into a single transcript? Now, I want to thank Dr. Bob Mash in Cape Town, South Africa, because it was he that sent this to me after a visit out there. And this is a transcript taken from a training exercise in South Africa. And I believe this is an actual transcript of a training transcript. I'm not sure this is exactly what happened in practice. It doesn't matter. It's a lovely piece of music. And that's what I'm wanting to highlight here, okay? But the content is, a mother walks into a rural clinic and both her and the child are HIV positive. There's a lot of pressure on the practitioner here who has other people standing in the hot sun not well. What does skillful practice look like?
Mm.
And where does listening fit into this? Because we often hear, I hear it in sport, education, healthcare, I don't have time to listen. And what this exchange confirms to me is that you don't have time not to listen. Okay, so I know that's a bit provocative, but I would say the less time you have, the more important it is to listen and connect, okay? But what I'm going to ask you to do is to look at this transcript twice, okay? It's on a single slide. First, give it a read for getting the context and getting the content. So we're going to leave you for a minute or two here. The second time you read it, see if you can experience it in a different way. See if you can notice the ebb and flow, the musicality of it. See if you can see what the mindset of this practitioner was. But then Joel and I are going to have a look at the actual skills involved, because that's what we're wanting to focus on in this part of the webinar. So over to you, James. Guys, we'll leave you for 60 to 90 seconds to have a good look at this single slide. She walks in. Okay. Okay, perhaps you can leave the transcript up there, as long as people can still see Joel and I. Joel, I wonder if there's anything you noticed that you'd like to highlight here.
How much ground you can cover in such a short time when you're paying attention to what the person, when you're totally focusing in on what's important to the person. There's a lot of territory that's covered and 5, 6 exchanges there.
Yeah.
In terms of engaging rapidly and empathically and trying to focus, allow her to share in what the focus of this interaction is going to be.
Yeah.
And giving her space to talk about what's important to her and what her concerns are.
So she's feeling connected.
Yeah.
And they are both.
The practitioner is feeling connected.
Say that again?
I said, and the practitioner is feeling connected too.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're developing a sense of direction.
Very quickly.
And within 60 to 90 seconds, towards the end there, the practitioner is ready to give information and advice.
Yep.
So we don't need to polarize listening with versus advice giving, because the musicality of good practice involves both.
Well, the urge or the urge to engage the writing reflex could come right off when, you know, both of your people coming in are HIV positive and how important it is for them to take the medication. And you could go straight from the first interaction to the last.
Yeah. So
you'd miss all the good stuff in the middle.
Yeah. And that could be very tempting there. And yet,
yeah, absolutely.
There's a quality of restraint. And if you think about the 3 C's that you let go of, you don't get the impression of a practitioner who's trying to be clever, overcomplicate it, or clutter this conversation. I think you do get the impression of someone who's curious, calm, and compassionate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, right
Just
from,
to let you know, Stephen, oh, sorry, you lost video, but you've come back. So that's fine.
oh, sorry, guys, sorry. I wondered whether I could make some comments about the skills involved here. I think in terms of the mindset, I imagine most of us can see that there's something special about this mindset. And my feeling is that this approximates closely to what Johan Cruyff was talking about when he talked about skillful football. It's very simple what we see here. It looks and feels like a normal conversation, but it's not easy. And this is a high level of skillfulness, displayed under difficult circumstances.
Yep.
You agree, Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. And the calmness and the mindset of going into conversations that are this big has to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a couple of questions that remain unanswered that are worth looking at here. One is, what is motivational interviewing? That's come up before, and I promised we'd have a look and say that and address that here. The other is, what are the skills being used here, and where is their listening? This is a great place to highlight it. So perhaps we'll deal with the more technical thing of where is listening in this musical score, and then turn to, well, in what way is this an illustration of motivational interviewing, which is in a way a secondary issue in this webinar, okay? Because motivational interviewing is mostly good practice in talking with someone about change, but there are some specific technical bits which we're going to highlight in a moment. But just as far as the musicality and the skills are concerned, Joel, do you notice like how many questions there are?
Yeah, there's 2 questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Two open-ended questions.
Carefully chosen and carefully timed.
Yes.
So in a way, it's like the drum coming down, boom, at the right time on the 4x4 or whatever. It's definitely there and it's well timed and it fits the purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
But what about in between?
Well, that's where the gold is all the in-between stuff. It's in the statements or reflective listening statements that, the listening statements, I think, as you say, Steve, that the practitioner is saying. And if you look at all the different roads that this practitioner could have gone down, particularly when he doesn't want to use condoms, and what sort of writing reflex that could kind of bring forth in a practitioner, and this person thought, yes, that's important, but whose agenda is it to go there right now? And so the question is asked, what would be most helpful for us to talk about?
Yeah,
that's condoms, your medication, your diet, or perhaps something else.
That's where motivational interviewing kicks in, which we're going to turn to, because it kicks in there when the subject of change comes up. And it kicks in there big time. But to begin with, what we notice are 2 empathic listening statements from the practitioner in a row. This baby is very important to you. It's not one of the things I hear you say, there's no dribble, there's no waffle. It's a very beautiful, from the side of the left foot of a footballer on the outside of the boot. It's beautiful. This baby is very important to you. And you want your baby to be healthy.
Right. And if you notice, she didn't say, I want my baby to be healthy. The practitioner kind of added in what she might say or what seems like would be a good fit for what she had said before. And so that's an important skill in listening.
Exactly. And it makes for a very efficient conversation, because the mother didn't need to say that. She just said, yes, that's right, you got me. And I told my husband, and he's supportive. We want these things, but So listening is an incredibly efficient way of establishing connection and moving forward and making progress. Because once people feel understood, they're happy to get more specific. And halfway down, when she says, I want to talk about the medication, that's when motivational interviewing comes in. And it's founded on the same basic musical tune. It's not something different. It's the same dance with the same dance steps as good client-centered counseling practice, which is what this is, but it's focused on change. And
Yes.
So to answer our friend who says, what is motivational interviewing in simple language? It's a style for having a conversation about change in which the mother, rather than the practitioner, says why and how they want to change, or what they want to change, why, and perhaps how. Although when it comes to the how, the mother says, I need to know a little bit more about the medicine. So motivational interviewing is a conversation about change in which listening statements are used to encourage the person to say for themselves why and how they make change rather than you. I did that quite well, Joel, don't you think?
Yeah, I would just add that it's a collaborative conversation.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what that last bit is. It's a collaboration about what should we focus on with the time that we have, without saying those other things aren't important, but this is what's important to the mom.
Yeah. And helping someone clarify why they want to change something is really important before addressing the how.
Absolutely.
The mother's done that for both of them, such that they are now ready for this practitioner to give the mother advice about missing doses. So motivational interviewing is not incompatible with giving someone advice.
No, not at all.
It's integrated with it. But look, Joel, I think it's time, looking at my watch, listen, I think it's time now to step back, move away from motivational interviewing, and consider a bit more Q&A. And then I've got some concluding take-home points to make. But Joel, just before we do that, I noticed at the side of my eye on the Q&A, I noticed somebody making a point about, can you use this with people who are deaf?
Are dead?
Deaf.
Oh.
EAF.
I was about to say, well, maybe in a gestaltish kind of way, you could use it with people that are dead.
No, stop that. Yeah, stop that. No, with somebody who's DEAF. And I just thought I'd tell you the story, right? It was quite recently, someone I was working with in a training course went home afterwards and sent me this wonderful email, which said, I've just been working with somebody who's deaf through a translator, so to speak. And I found that these listening skills were truly awesome. And I noticed the change talk. Now, this was on Skype with a translator. And just like your story from Burma, over the barriers of language and culture, it is possible to work with people who are hard of hearing or are deaf. So I just caught that out the side of my eye, and I wanted to respond to that colleague who raised that question.
Well, in some ways, and not in some ways, it's another form of language.
Yeah.
And I think I've done trainings where they've had people come in and sign the trainings because a couple of the participants were deaf.
Yeah.
And I got the opportunity to spend time with the translators and the participants, and they thought that they both thought that it had great promise.
Yeah.
As a skill to work with folks. Of course, they would need to adapt it into their own language and into their own way of being and their own unique culture. But there was nothing incompatible with the work.
In fact, the greater the barrier between you and someone else, whether that be class, culture, sensory deficit or whatever, the greater is the value of listening.
Yes, indeed. That's one thing I found in my travels is that you can overcome a lot of language barriers by just trying to find a way to listen and communicate with each other.
So we agree about that. And James, we're ready to move on to the last Q&A. And then we've got some interesting concluding comments.
So we have a question. Many of us are doing our consultations over the phone at the moment, and it's much harder with no visual cues. Do you have any tips on that?
No, I
I
don't.
can tell you what I do in the work I'm doing now when I'm doing it over the telephone is and I've never met the person and I don't have any visuals. I actually sometimes close my eyes and kind of imagine, sitting with them and really try to tune into try to listen to and tune into how they're speaking. It's like, for me, it's like listening to an audio book sometimes or I can just try to create what's happening in my mind, because that really helps me.
And I said, no, I don't have any answers because I don't have any experience of this. But as you were talking, Joel, it obviously is striking me that it's like talking to somebody who's blind. Anyway, it's a passing thought, but I genuinely don't have experience of this and would prefer not to try and be clever about it at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, Eleanor asks, you said regarding the two questions that they are perfectly timed. How do you know when the time is right or not right to ask a question?
From the reaction of the person in front of you, I would say.
You read my mind. And if it's done in an empathic way, even if the question is off base, I've found that people will appreciate that I'm trying to be helpful and trying to understand. The same with reflective listening or empathy statements.
We have an anonymous question. I think a really important skill in MI and listening is silence. Would you agree with that?
Can I jump into that first, Steve? And it seems that over the last few years, when I've done role plays with people in my trainings, people have started asking me, do you intentionally be silent? And my answer is no, but quite often I'm listening to what the person's saying and I'm thinking about how I'm going to respond. And there's a pause. Or they're thinking about what I've asked or what I've reflected. And that lets me know that they're digesting it and they're thinking about it. I think silence is an important thing, not so much in a psychoanalytic way where you kind of utilize it as a therapeutic skill, but it allows time for ideas to breathe and thoughts to form and new things to connect.
And from the child learning a puzzle or a task, an athlete trying to get on top of a skill, a client in a consulting room, a group of people in a classroom, in a sports team, silence and a bit of space to reflect and ingest and feel connected is gold dust. It's complete gold dust.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary the extent to which we fall into the trap of filling space with mouthfuls of busy talk. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, one more.
Yeah.
From Gaynor. What happens if you feel that the client's goals are not what will bring them to the best place for them? Interesting one.
Yeah, and with 5 minutes to go, and I know that there's a few things we need to cover, I would ask Gaynor to grab hold of my email and write to me. And Gaynor, I absolutely promise I'll write back. Okay? But I really don't feel we've got the time for this right now. And
You
Gaynor,
can CC me on the email too if you want, and I'll jump in the conversation.
promise Gaynor, okay, because it's a big one, and I don't think we've got time for it. And
yeah, and it's a core part of MI, the whole thing around autonomy support.
Yeah,
and we don't have time to jump into it. And
Dave,
I think I can just share really quickly. The hardest thing about my career has been in working with addictions. The hardest thing is to see people who know, and I think it amazes me about being a psychologist, is why we choose to do things as people that we know aren't going to lead to good outcomes, but we do them anyway.
James, you might have an opportunity for one more question, and certainly Joan and I are going to try and answer it super briefly.
Super briefly.
Okay. For motivational interviewing to take place, do the clients need to trust you?
Yes. Next question.
I have too long of an answer for that, Steve. I don't think the answer is no. I think they need to believe that you can help them and that you're interested in who they are.
I think I saw one from Cape Town, from Lorraine Jordan.
Oh yeah, I've got that one. Who do you look up to as someone who lives your philosophy?
I don't know what my philosophy really is, to be honest. I know about a set of values, and I think most of them have been expressed in different ways in this webinar. And I rather talk less about mine than about other people right now and what I notice in the world around us in this time of uncertainty. And I would point to Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand as a leader. I watched her last night sitting sort of cross-legged on her sofa, talking to the people of New Zealand. This is their Prime Minister. And I was bowled over by her humanity, her ability to connect and to empathize with people. So that is somebody I would definitely look up to, whatever her political persuasion is. I don't really know what it is. I was very struck by that. And in my world of sport, I look up to somebody called Jurgen Klopp, who I think embodies the values that we've been talking about, and is truly brilliant at listening and true to his values in every word that he utters. So Lorraine in Cape Town, I'm sorry if that's a bit of a brief answer, but yeah. Okay. Joel?
All right, I'll be brief. And one of the things that you know, having lived in New Zealand and being a New Zealand citizen, now living in Australia, and I agree with you. I think Jacinda Ardern is doing a magnificent job in what she's had to deal with since becoming Prime Minister of New Zealand, and her ability to listen and try to understand, but make hard decisions. Now, what's really interesting to me is living over here, the Prime Minister is on the other side of the political fence. Scott Morrison would be more of a conservative, but I've been watching how he's been managing this issue, right? The COVID-19 issue. And the poll just came out that he's one of the most popular prime ministers since Kevin Rudd. And I don't know all of what his political persuasion is, but he's been able to really connect with the Australian people in what seems to be a genuine way and an empathic way, and trying not just to say what he thinks people want to hear, but trying to really understand what's going on and make decisions. And now the interesting thing is we have two different countries, two different political ideologies, and they're both incredibly successful at managing the COVID-19 virus. And they're having two somewhat different strategies in doing it. So that's interesting to me as somebody who thinks about this stuff. The other thing that I just want to say quickly is when you first asked that question, James, I thought, well, motivational interviewing isn't a philosophical framework that I live my life by. It's a psychological counseling skill that resonates with the way I think about things, that has some overlap with some of the values and the philosophies that underpin the way I choose to live my life. You know, I don't always get it right, and I scratch my head about decisions I make all the time. But I really think it's important to realize that MI isn't an ideology, and it isn't even a psychological theory. You know, as far as I know, Steve's nodding, no, it's not. So, you know, it's not a philosophy to live your life by, but there's some really good skills and ideas that can help negotiate the world.
So what
for you are with yourself?
So what for you are the take-home messages from this webinar? If I give you just half a minute on takeaway messages.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say right off, Steve, the first thing is your 6 C's. I'm going to pinch that from you, if you don't mind, for training. And I'm going to incorporate it into my practice a little bit more. The other one is that, that I don't have to have all the answers in a time of uncertainty, you know, and as a parent and as a psychologist and as someone who wants to be helpful, actually, I need to listen and not provide solutions unless they're immediate and there's something I can actually offer somebody that's helpful. And the third one is that the more I talk about motivational interviewing and I listen to other people talk about it, the more I realize that, you know, we're still looking over the side of the cliff, and it's a really deep cliff and we can't see the bottom. And even after 30 years, you know, we know a lot, but we still got a lot more to learn.
Thank you, Joel. And for me, I guess the take-home messages are the ability to empathize and make listening statements is something that's in all of us. That it involves a calm and curious mindset. That it's something that can be practiced in everyday life. And it's well worth focusing on in this time of uncertainty. So there are the take-home messages from Joel and myself. And I'd like to end this webinar by making an appeal, telling you a story and making an appeal. I'd like to thank James, who's been a total rock for us.
Absolutely.
Joel and I don't have the faintest clue about this technology. So just take this moment, James, to thank you, my brother. You've been so helpful. And you've done this as a volunteer, and I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, man.
Oh, thanks for those kind words. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be involved. Thank you.
Let me just tell you a story. 10 days ago, I got in touch with somebody who runs a not-for-profit organization. It happened to be in Cape Town, but honestly, this could be anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere or in a deprived community in the Northern Hemisphere. His name's Ralph Bovers, and he runs something called Guardians of the National Treasure to support the well-being of children in a particularly deprived community called Lavender Hill in Cape Town. And 10 days ago, when I spoke to him about helping to raise some money for this not-for-profit, his concern was about football boots and football strips, which is what led me to him in the first place. Literally, just in the last 10 days, his needs have changed from sporting equipment to food boxes to really quite frightened and frightening efforts to get food and help to people in a rather rapidly descending situation in that particular township, which is probably a mirror of what might be happening elsewhere. Ralph was going to come on to this call and say hello to you all. And he couldn't. Literally, this morning I hear he's in a truck getting apples. That's what he's doing. Now, look, I, behind the scenes, did a check on the financial probity and structures of this not-for-profit. And I'm more than satisfied that Ralph is a golden human being running a superb organization under the most incredible circumstances right now, because the impact of lockdown in many of the poorer parts of the world isn't on infection. It's the side effects of the lockdown that are really devastating. And that includes loss of jobs and access to food. So what James is going to do is place a URL in the Q&A box. And this is a call from myself and from Joel and from Ralph in Cape Town to plug a donation in, and that URL should be able to lead you directly into making a donation. And I promise you one thing, that I will be returning to all of you in the form of an email in due course and informing you of a couple of things. How much money was raised, a video message from Ralph, and what our plans are for future projects of this kind. So on that note, can I just double check with James that the URL is indeed?
Yeah, if someone could just do me a big favor and just type in a question, what is the URL, or something similar to that, and that then gives me the opportunity to paste the URL and answer that question, which we can all see. So
Mary,
we're going to get a lot of what is the URL. This will be fun.
Thank you, Mary.
There we go. Thanks so much. So I will.
What I do know is that what Ralph does is he literally goes to the bank and takes the money out and spends it. And it's a pretty direct line. Thanks for that, Mary. And the URL.
So now hopefully you can now see that in the answered tab of the Q&A.
Lots of people asking, what is the URL? The latest question from Caitlin Hayton says, what is a URL? Sarah says the same thing.
I knew that would happen.
Somebody, Neelam, can you email Lavender Hill bank details, please? URL, please. URL is there, says Margaret. I don't see it.
So in the Q&A, there's open questions. There's an answered questions tab, which is the middle of the three, and it's pasted in there. And and the question came from Salma, I think the name is. So hopefully you can all see that. I will also include that URL in the follow-up email that contains the recording of the webinar tomorrow.
Yeah, someone's saying the link isn't clickable.
Not clickable.
That's quite a verb. Clickable. People are raising their hands. Don't have an answered questions tab.
Okay, Steve, do you have a chat function on your Zoom controls? Because that's not visible to me. If you do, we can share it in the chat.
La la la. Not that I can see. Just let me have a quick look here. No, I can't say I do.
Okay, well, all I can say then is we will then share that URL in the follow-up email that goes out.
And people, I can tell you, if you plug into Google, Guardians of the National Treasure, isn't that the most wonderful phrase? Guardians of the National Treasure.
That'll link you straight to it.
That'll take you straight to it. Guardians of the National Treasure.
Yeah.
Mike Townsend sees he's seen it. And Jody Pitt, thank you so much. You've gone and put it in there. So if you look up to Jody Pitt, it's about 10 questions up. And Kathy Gumas says there, thank you, Kathy. I know you're in Belfast.
Hey, Kathy.
Works fine. Thank you, my darling. I'm so glad that link works for you, Kathy. It probably means for other people it does as well. Otherwise, Guardians of the National Treasure. And at this point, I'm wondering whether we stay online, whether there's a few more questions. There's about 400 people still online, Joel, James.
Yeah. I was just going to go get a glass of wine to toast our first thing. Give me 1 second. I'm happy to hang out and answer questions and chat more.
Go and get your glass.
Okay.
Lucky man. But James, I'm happy to hang on because there are over 350 people still online. James, are you all right, or is it very late there? Is it time to wind up? I leave this decision to you.
It is late, but I'm fine to carry on for another 20 minutes, half hour if the questions are still coming in.
Let's carry on for another 10,
Yeah.
15 minutes max, James.
Yeah.
Could I just say that we'll be sending everybody an email? Yeah?
We will. Yeah,
great?
with the recording, and also I'll ensure that links in the email as well for the donations too. So my apologies that if people can't copy and paste that, but that will go out tomorrow.
Okay, good stuff. So you'll get an email from us within 24 hours. So those that need to be in touch can. There's something that I see there's somebody by the name of Elizabeth Egan here. I want to say that my fantasy wish, Elizabeth, is that you're related to Gerard Egan, who's somebody who I believe is still alive and has done the most brilliant work, and his model of helping is something that's inspired me. Well worth looking up, people. Gerard Egan, wonderful man. Now, happy to take questions if people want to post them.
Cheers, Steve.
Cheers to your help. So James?
Okay, what is the best way to practice reflections?
Most useful thing that I heard was from my good friend Jeff Allison, a trainer in communication, who said, if you want to get on top of this, you're talking to somebody, see if you in your own mind can capture the essence of what they're saying and just hand it back to them. So don't hand back a whole lot of words. Capture the essence in your mind of what they're saying and be bold enough to hand it back to them. I would say also practice in easy circumstances rather than tough ones. Yes. So when you're having an easy, simple conversation, a kid is perfect to practice with. But when you're having a nice, easy conversation with somebody, see if you can capture the essence of what they're saying and hand it back to them and watch what happens. So that's what I would suggest. Another tip would be ask a brilliant open question of somebody and then say to yourself, right, now I'm going to try and capture the essence.
Yeah. One of the things that I used to do in New Zealand, the Drug and Alcohol Service, is that, some colleagues that were also interested, we would just practice with each other, and you would say something and you just practice with each other if you have people around. But I totally agree, in the home, out with friends, with your colleagues in the break room, in meetings, just ease into it, ease into it.
There are also videos, the Cleveland Clinic, if you can remember that. You look that up on YouTube, you'll find some wonderful Cleveland Clinic empathy videos. That's useful for grasping the kind of mindset. And I think it's important to remember that you're not practicing a new skill. You'll notice in conversations between people that the skill is used and it's inside you. So what you're doing is uncovering and rediscovering something that's already inside you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Start simple. Start in an easy setting, not where you feel like you have to do it right, or you have to, like with motivational interviewing, you just start somewhere, but start easy. And I think that, listening and reflective listening is the other half of empathic listening. And what I found in working with people is that's the steepest part of the learning curve of motivational interviewing, where people go, oh, it's just too hard. It's too much. And if they can get confident in doing that, then it's easier to kind of start bringing on the other aspects of MI.
Yeah, I found it very easy to teach kids the skill of reflection because their minds are less cluttered and they're more naturally curious. I remember my daughter at age of 8 or 9, I modeled it and she repeated it. And she's 10 years older now, she's 18. And we have conversations using reflection naturally all the time. The older you get and the more cluttered your mind gets, the tougher it is to let go of the clutter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
it's back to one of those C's, which is clutter. Now look, I've stopped the Q&A scrolling because I noticed Greg Spencer's asked about against empathy. And then Hannah's got a question and Kimberly's got a question. I wonder if you mind if we just try and see if we can get through some of those. James, Joel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think against empathy is it's a big question. I think Paul Bloom has some good things to say. And I think that there's a little bit of a, hello, Rosie. I think there's a little bit of a mismatch with what he's saying and what we're saying.
It is a bit. It's Greg Spencer. He's at 3 minutes, 3.41, 0341, just so James knows where we are. I think let's go down through those questions. Greg, I think I agree with Joel. It's worth looking at Bloom's work, but I think what he's talking about is the experience of empathy, not the conveying it in the form of listening in a conversation. Our webinar's been about that skill. So I don't feel anything that we have gone through today has a lot of bearing on what he's saying. He's talking about the experience of empathy. And I think if I get it, Greg, it's that you're more likely to experience empathy for your own folk than for others. And this isn't necessarily such a constructive thing because you're more likely to see other people as not like you. And so you can't just say, oh, empathy is a good thing for everybody all the time. And I don't think that's what we're saying. What we are saying, however, is that uncertainty is widespread in conversation. And when you are in conversation with somebody, the practice of empathic listening has no dangers. It has no downsides in my view. Okay. I wonder whether he's confusing empathy with identification. And I'm a bit confused about that. But I noticed this leads nicely into Hannah's next question about empathy fatigue. So do you mind if we don't be too ponderous here and just move through them?
No, that was right where I was going to go to. Go ahead.
Hannah's highlighting something that I've noticed myself and my family, which is I've got the same fears and concerns as other people. And it's really hard to listen and to be helpful. And as a father, I've got 4 kids. And I noticed one of my kids is going through a hard time. And I'm not that hot at listening at a time like this. And Hannah, I can't solve that for us, I can only say that I'm aware of it and I try and make amends if I can, But I've noticed I'm so preoccupied with so many things, it's back to clutter, that it's really hard to empathize with somebody that I love very dearly. And so what we have to do, I guess, Hannah, is first of all, notice our own feelings, our own underlying feelings, and see if we can park them. Because if we can't park them, we can't listen. Or it's much harder.
It's a different context, isn't it, Steve? And context is really important. And it's hard to be the eagle when I'm also the mouse.
Correct. Correct.
When my heart or something that I value or that's important to me is central part of the conversation that's going on, it's hard sometimes to step back. But I notice when I do, it's like taking a breath, and it gives me some time to think about, what is this what is this person saying? What am I missing? What am I not hearing? And I do think a psychologist that I supervise, we had a session today, and she was talking about a new client that she's working with who has a horrific trauma history. And she said, by the time she got to her first husband committing suicide, she said, I literally felt like I was going to fall out of my chair. Now, this woman also just had a friend of hers commit suicide 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so it was just a lot all at once. And what she was talking about was she couldn't give anymore. She couldn't empathize anymore because she was full.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how we have to be able to find a way to not so much detach, but to really kind of park our stuff for a little while when we go into these conversations. I mean, I think listening is a very intentional thing in terms of the context we're talking about. And that's part of the mindset of it is what I'm doing right now, what I intend to do right now is give this person my full presence and attention.
And sometimes it'll be easier than others, and go for the
Absolutely.
a bit easier. And see if
Absolutely.
you can create a context in everyday life when it's a bit easier than other times.
Sure. Or when clients are talking about something I'm struggling with at the same time, and there's that parallel process going on.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm wanting to say, yeah, I'm right with you, brother, you know, but I know that's not going to be helpful.
No.
We have had a couple of people ask to be reminded of those 6 C's that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Perhaps you'd like to just revisit those quickly.
Yeah. You want to, please don't quote me on this because it's just come up in the last flipping week, right? So,
I've already got it written down, Steve.
Yeah,
I've
but that's, you know, it has no value other than just to stimulate thinking, right? But it's for listening well, you want to let go of cleverness, complexity, scratching your head, wondering what someone's saying, what are they, and clutter. Okay, and clutter includes a desire to solve the problem, wondering about a whole lot of other things that might be happening. You want to free your mind of that. And you want to hold on to curiosity. That's the fundamental, that's what kids teach us, the value of. And you want to try and be calm. That's the second C. And compassionate. So cleverness, complexity, clutter on the downside or the let go side, and curious, calm, and compassionate on the upside. It's just one way of looking at it. Okay, James?
Fantastic. And just a thank you to everyone that said they've clicked through and made donations already. We all really appreciate that. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Way to go, folks.
I cannot tell you what Ralph Bovers is going to be like. In fact, can I say to those people, go onto that donation page and have a look at the interview. I think it's a BBC interview with Ralph.
He's lovely.
He is the most wonderful human being. Right. Kimberly says, could we go back to the previous question? What if the goals of your clients won't bring them to the best outcome? And Hugh Gilmore says, can you have a go at Gainer's question? Wasn't this Gainer's question? If there's some kind of mismatch between what you think is best for somebody and what the person feels is best.
So I'll share a little bit on this. This is a very interesting kind of sometimes ethical, if not sometimes moral dilemma that comes up in the work that we do with people. And one of the things that I get the opportunity to go to places like Singapore and Hong Kong and a good bit to train where, you know, the cultural differences, you know, are there. And this is a very common question. And it probably comes up in lots of other places in different contexts. And usually in the second day of a motivational interviewing training is that somebody will say, my patients, my clients just want me to tell them what to do. And I usually think about that and I say, well, and I remember I said, well, what do they do when you tell them what to do? And the woman said, most of the time they don't do it. And then I said, then what do you do? She said, I tell them again. And my take on this is if somebody is in a risky place and they're really struggling or with coming up with some solutions or what they've come up with, it could put them at risk or in harm's way in some way. What I usually try to do is I try to validate the fact that they're thinking about it and they're coming up with some ideas. And then I usually ask them, would it be all right with you if I put a couple ideas on the table to see what you think about? And then I share, my suggestions, recommendations, but I've got their permission, because there's two things that people tend not to like about advice is unsolicited advice and being told things they already know. So I try to avoid those two traps. And more often than not, that creates a whole nother conversation where they might sort of say, well, I hadn't thought about that. Can you tell me more about it? And the challenging part of this is that people, in my experience as a human being and working with people, is that we're going to do what we're going to do. And sometimes there's nothing that can get in the way of us doing that, no matter what people do with us, to us, or for us. And so on a very fundamental level, I genuinely accept that people are autonomous human beings, even though I may not agree with the decisions that they make. I'm done.
And it's quite an issue, this, and it's something we've grappled with over decades. And it's very difficult to use something like motivational interviewing in a constructive way if there isn't a shared sense of direction. So put that way, we describe this as a focusing issue. And the ideal is to get some kind of agreement on what the change is that you both feel is worth looking at. And I worry about being clever or complex here. So you can see I'm living out the letting go, two of those letting go C's. And I'm often struck, and it's just a different way of saying what Joel has said, which is I'm often struck by being genuine, sincere, and stepping back out of the conversation with the person. And that stepping back and outside of the conversation gave rise to something that we called agenda mapping, which you can catch in descriptions of motivational interviewing, where you basically step away and say, look, we could be talking about this or this or this. What do you reckon? And it gives you an opportunity for frank exchange.
And that happened in the slide you put up.
Did it? Yes, it did. It happened.
Do you want to talk about the condoms or, your medications?
It's exactly right. It's exactly right. That was a agenda mapping in just like one little crystal clear, skillful sentence.
Yeah.
Right. I'm starting to scroll down. Am I wise here to just do it in this way?
Yeah.
Anna Chisholm seems quite active. Favorite evoking question, set of questions. Any you go to often as they seem to have a great effect. Anna, I don't know, I don't want to be clever here, because really the best evoking question is the one that you notice breathes fire and life into the person you're speaking to. And I don't think there are any. People are so different. Every conversation is different. But keep the question simple, clear. The word notice, I think, is incredibly important. And I know good sports coaches are using that all the time. What do you notice about that high jump? And how do you feel about it? So the open questions that contain the word notice are incredibly helpful. In motivational interviewing, as you quite rightly pick up, Anna, the open questions are evocative. In other words, they focused on change. So it would be something like, to an athlete, it would be, what kind of coaching do you think is going to help you be your best? How's that? Right? That's going to evoke quite an answer that's going to have the coach reflecting about themselves. Or to a school teacher, to a pupil, what do you think is going to help you get on top of the skill the best? What do you need now? So questions that focus on people's needs. I don't know, Anna, it's quite a long list, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, and when people have a dilemma, and then they're feeling, they have mixed thoughts and feelings about doing something, is sometimes offering them a reflection, that looks at both sides of it. On the one hand, I could see how alcohol can be really important to you, and it, in many ways has become your best friend because it's the only thing there, that actually understands. And at the same time, it seems like what I hear you saying, that it's taking its toll, and and it's starting to add up in terms of your marriage and the amount of money you're spending and other things that are important to you. Is that right? And then if they go, yeah, I've never really thought of it that way, then what do you think about that? How do how do you put those two things together? And it's interesting because it slows people down, and they have to think about how they hold two diametrically opposed ideas together. And quite often when people are struggling with something, they tend to compartmentalize things either here or there. It's good, it's bad. And sometimes good reflection followed with a nice open-ended question, like Steve said, can really be quite evocative for people. Particularly if I'm not judging the good things, and siding with the less good things about something someone's struggling with.
Yeah. You guys mustn't hesitate to send me a message on Twitter. My son's trying to help me learn this medium, okay? And we'll be sending you an email, and you can connect with me in other ways as well. I wanted to briefly address guys. We're half an hour over the time. James, it's late for you and Joel, and I think we should give ourselves just another few minutes and then wind down.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to address a question by Finton Kennedy. I don't know where you are, Finton, but I think it's a great question. If you're having a difficult relationship with somebody, how do you employ MI to improve it without the other person feeling you're trying to manipulate them? It's a great question, because I've often puzzled over, is MI relevant at home? And I feel this, Finton, I don't think you should use MI with a partner in a difficulty. I think it smacks of inauthenticity. I think that's what you're pinpointing. They notice you being inauthentic. And, but I don't think that applies to listening, which is why this webinar is focused on listening. So I think to practice listening skills and to self-regulate yourself in a relationship so that you can listen is well worth practicing. And then there's something else, Minton, which is a bit provocative. How's about this? Don't use MI at home to address a problem. That's typically the terrain of MI, is focused on problems. I'm starting to develop a different sense of this, that the really valuable place of MI is in helping people to grow and thrive. That's why I went into education, and now I'm in sport, because it never is an arena where all sports coaches united by wanting to help people thrive. MI's got a beautiful place there. So if you're at home and you see an opportunity with your partner, with a kid, to help them thrive, use MI for all you are worth. And they will appreciate it, and they won't feel you manipulating them, because you're being authentic in your pursuit of their interests, okay? The moment you start using it to solve a problem, like a dirty room of a kid, or a wife a partner who's shouting at you or whatever, I think it's inauthentic, and I wouldn't do it. Okay?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. My dad was a psychologist, and I remember one night he and my older brother were in an argument, and I'm guessing what my dad did was he stepped in the psychologist kind of role, and my brother probably would have been 14 at the time, said, "Don't do that double trick psychology on me," And what he was asking for was him to be genuine, and not to try to be a therapist in the moment when there was a relational issue to be going on. I think there are, as Steve was saying, I think that in our personal relationships and friendships, and there's a key place for listening. and wanting things to be better when they're not so good. But I think the listening part is the key, not the change part.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, we're going to wind up very soon, and I noticed a message from Isabel Duarte, whom I think I know. I think you're in Portugal. It's wonderful to hear from you. Catherine Reynolds, similar theme. Do you think we all have to be better listening skills after coming through the current COVID crisis? I mean, that's why we put this webinar on, because it's not just about managing ourselves and helping others in the current situation, but as we come out of it, there's going to be a lot of confusion because the world's not going to be the same. And
No,
yeah, whether you're
I agree.
a parent, a sports coach, a friend, a simple open question like how you're getting on is worth its weight in gold. And when you ask a really good question, the main message from this webinar is to reflect for all you're worth after asking it. You've knocked on the door. When you go inside, use reflection. And I think, and hope that this is something that we can help ourselves and others to do over the coming weeks and months. And I'm wondering whether, on that rather somber note, I didn't mean to be too somber, we could wind up now, Joel. Are you happy about that?
Yeah. You know, I'm absolutely.
And perhaps what we can.
There is no good place to end a good conversation.
No, that's right. That's right. We've got to go now, guys. And perhaps we'll discuss with James the possibility of holding on to these questions and working through them ourselves and sending you a single document with answers to them. Maybe we'll try and do that. No promises. It'll depend on James's wizardry. So look.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'll just draw people's attention to the next webinar in this series coming up on the 14th of May, the title of which is Sport and Empathy, and we'll include the registration link in the follow-up email from today if people are interested in joining us in 2 weeks' time.
That's super. And
it'll be a spin on a topic, that's for sure.
No, we're going to have some arguments there, right?
It'll be fun.
And Kathy, thank you for helping us clarify that the link works. Please donate. It's just an incredibly awesome gift to give Ralph. And I'll be phoning him immediately after the seminar to tell him that people have really responded. And bless you and thank you very much.
Yeah.
And so on that note, goodbye, good luck, and thank you to all of you, wherever you are.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. I've learned a lot tonight, and I look forward to further conversations, Steve.
So James, you'll presumably knock people off?
Yeah, we can just end the meeting now. So thanks and good night from me as well. And we'll see you hopefully in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, so I see even now there's like just a moment ago, there were still 150 people online. It dropped down from, I don't know what the peak was, but it steadily dropped down. And it was that drop down that I thought, let's not overdo it now, you know?
Yeah, no, that was good. Okay, there you are. Put you on the big picture. Well, it was fun, Steve.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I found the stuff about MI, all the stuff about MI, I was going, oh no, let's not talk about MI, let's not talk about MI, because I felt like, no, the subject is listening and let's just get through do a few simple things well, but it's inevitable. And the questions are all coming in about, MI. So what can we do, James, how did you find it, my man?
I'll tell you what, I was nervous when we started, and at some point the nervousness went away.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was good that they were saying some things we knew, but a lot of it was unknown. So that made it fun.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
I didn't feel like we were struggling to fill time, which was good.
No.
I wasn't tracking how people were dropping off over the course of it,
Yeah.
because that would be too much to attend to. But if we had 400 people at the end of it, that was really good.
Yeah.
And right towards the end, it started to really drop off after we gave our takeaway messages.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I feel next time what will be better is to keep an eye on the clock and aim to finish like 10 minutes before.
Right.
So that people get the feeling these guys don't go on too long. Boom, boom, boom. We wind up 5 minutes early. You know what I mean? That will be a nice thing. I just noticed.
Yeah, well, people plan out the time, particularly if it's during the daytime. It's not like, you know, a Joe Rogan podcast where you know it's going to go for 3 hours. So, but that's not what we're wanting to do. So that's fine.
Listen, I'm just noticing James has sent an email saying I can't access that control. And I don't know
Which
what
control?
Do you know what he's talking about?
You like people still listening to us?
It's possible. James has disappeared as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if people are still hearing us, that's okay. They can send us feedback.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I really enjoyed it. I mean, you know, it's the first time we've ever done anything like this. And,
Yeah,
you know, finding a way to work together, this has been great. And this seems to be a nice way for us to connect.
And we'll probably get feedback from folk.
I hope so.
I did ask James to see if he could do some kind of polling, but that didn't happen. It might have been happening without us being aware of it.
You might look, yeah, I don't know. James disappeared. I mean, he has little kids and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So he's probably like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
They're going to be up in 4 hours. I'm out of here.
Yes. All right, my
It's
man.
still recording. So, you know, you're still recording us.
But I think let's hang up now. So I've got to get,
man.
and thank you so much. I thought it was great.
Yeah, no, it was good, Steve. I enjoyed it. I think, you know, it'll be good. It's good.
The numbers.
It'll be good to think about it and reconnect in a couple days and see what we think.
Thank you very much, Shane.
Right on, brother.
See you, man. Bye.
See you next time.
Yeah.